My CPA called on a Thursday morning and said, "Walter, I need you to come in tomorrow. Alone. Don't say anything to Kyle yet. I've found something going through your quarterly reports, and you need to see it before anyone else does." I had been standing in my kitchen when Dennis said that, coffee in hand, watching the sprinklers run across the backyard the way I did every morning since Margaret passed. 3 years of that routine. 3 years of quiet mornings I had learned to make peace with. The coffee was hot. The desert light was just starting to streak orange across the Catalinas, and Dennis Hartwell, the man who had done my books for 22 years, sounded like he was sitting on something that was going to burn both of us. "What kind of something, Dennis?" "I'd rather show you in person, Walter. Just come in at 9. I set down my mug. Through the kitchen window I could hear voices from the back bedroom. My daughter-in-law's mother, Patrice, talking to someone on her phone, the way she did every morning, at a volume that suggested the person on the other end was standing on the far side of a canyon. And somewhere from the living room, the particular sound of the television being turned on before 8 in the morning, which meant Cody was already out there, which meant he'd slept on my couch again, instead of wherever he'd told Patrice he was going to sleep. "I'll be there," I said to Dennis. After we hung up, I stood with the phone in my hand for a long moment. The sprinklers clicked off. The Catalinas turned from orange to gold. Somewhere in the back of the house, my daughter-in-law laughed at something her mother said. I had built Briggs plumbing supply from a truck and a storage unit in 1989. By the time I sold the second location in 2019, we had 4 stores across southern Arizona, 43 employees, and a reputation solid enough that contractors called us before they called anyone else. Margaret had kept the books for the first 12 years. Dennis had taken over after that. Between the two of them, I had never lost sleep over money. I was losing sleep now, not because of any single thing I could name, more like a collection of small wrongnesses that had been accumulating since my son brought his wife home 11 months ago. Diana was pleasant in the way that certain people are pleasant, meaning she was pleasant when it was useful. She called me Dad from the first week. She complimented my house, my taste, my cooking, everything I did with an enthusiasm that felt slightly rehearsed, like a performance she had workshopped before arriving. My son was 34 years old and had been in love with her for 7 months before the wedding. That was how long they had dated. 7 months. Margaret would have had something to say about that timeline. But Margaret wasn't here, and I'd watched my son's face when he talked about Diana, and decided that happiness was worth respecting even when it made me nervous. What I had not expected was for the temporary arrangement to calcify. Diana's mother had come to help with the move-in. That was the explanation in October. By December, Patrice was still occupying the guest room, her toiletries spread across the bathroom counter, her meal preferences shaping what appeared in my refrigerator. She had never offered rent. She had never mentioned leaving. She spoke about the house as if she had been here longer than I had, pointing out to visitors which tiles she thought should be replaced, asking me when I planned to repaint the hallway. Cody had appeared in January. He was Patrice's boyfriend of unclear duration, a large man who laughed too loud and asked me detailed questions about my finances with the specific casualness of someone who had practiced asking them. He worked, he said, in logistics, though I had never seen him leave for work at any consistent hour. He slept on the couch more nights than not. He ate my food and drank my beer, and called me by my first name, with a familiarity I had never extended. My son believed in the goodness of people. Margaret had raised him that way, and it was one of the things I loved most about him. He saw Patrice as a woman going through a difficult transition. He saw Cody as someone who needed a stable environment. He saw my discomfort as the predictable friction of an old man adjusting to a full house. Every time I tried to raise the subject, I watched him flinch in the way that people flinch when they are caught between two loyalties and have already quietly chosen one. I had told myself I was being patient. I had told myself I was giving the situation time. Dennis's phone call told me I had given it too much. His office was in a 2-story building off Oracle Road, the kind of place where the parking lot always had the same 10 cars and the receptionist knew your name before you reached the desk. I had been coming here since 1995. Helen at the front smiled when I came in. Dennis met me at the door to his office himself, which he never did, and closed it behind us before I had even sat down. "Walter," he said, "I want to show you something before I explain anything. I want you to see it first." He turned his monitor so I could read it. A spreadsheet, my business accounts, columns of figures. He pointed to a row highlighted in yellow. This withdrawal, February 14th, $11,400. Business checking, marked as vendor payment to a company called Suncrest Materials, LLC. He looked at me over his glasses. "Do you recognize that vendor?" I leaned forward. "No." He clicked to another window. "Secretary of State Records, Suncrest Materials, LLC, registered in Arizona, February 2nd of this year, 12 days before that withdrawal." He scrolled down to the registered agent. The name was Diana Hargrove Briggs, my daughter-in-law. I sat back in my chair. "There are two more," Dennis said quietly. "March 7th, $9,000. April 2nd, $8,200. All marked as vendor payments. All to Suncrest. Total of $28,600. Over 10 weeks. I looked at the numbers. My hands were steady. The room felt very still. "I didn't authorize those," I said. "I know you didn't." Dennis pulled a folder from his drawer and slid it across the desk. "That's what concerns me most." He opened it to a page with two signatures side by side. One is yours from the business loan we renewed last October. The other is from the vendor authorization forms for these payments. He pointed to them both. "They're close. Good enough to get past a routine review. But look at the K in Briggs." I looked. My K dropped below the baseline slightly, a habit from grade school I had never corrected. The signature on the vendor forms had a K that sat perfectly on the line. "Someone copied your signature, Walter. And whoever did it knew enough about your handwriting to get close." I thought about who had access to documents with my signature on them. I thought about the filing cabinet in my home office that I had shown Kyle how to use 3 years ago when I had my gallbladder surgery and needed someone who could retrieve paperwork in an emergency. I thought about the passwords I had written on an index card taped inside that same cabinet drawer because I was 62 years old and had 12 different passwords for 12 different accounts, and I was not ashamed of the index card. "Does Kyle know about this?" I asked. "I don't know. I called you first." His voice was careful. I didn't want to assume. "What's in the company?" I asked. "Suncrest." Dennis shook his head. "No filings beyond registration. No employees, no contracts, no business activity on record. It's a shell. Created to receive money and registered to your daughter-in-law 12 days before the first payment hit." I sat with that for a moment. The air in Dennis's office smelled like coffee and old paper. Outside the window, a delivery truck was backing into the lot next door, beeping steadily. "I need to know if there's anything else," I said. Dennis nodded. "I've been looking since yesterday afternoon." He pulled out another page. "Your personal savings account." He pointed to a line. "March 19th. A transfer of $12,000 to an external account. The authorization came through your online banking portal." "I hadn't made that transfer." "Your son has access to your online banking," Dennis said. "You added him 2 years ago." "I added him in case I was ever incapacitated. In case something happened to me the way something had happened to Margaret, quickly and without warning. And someone needed to manage my accounts while I was in a hospital somewhere." "I know," Dennis said. He looked at me with the particular expression of someone who is about to say something he has been deciding whether to say. "Walter, I've known you since your second store. I'm not telling you this to tell you what it means. I'm telling you because you need to know." I picked up my coffee cup. Empty. I didn't remember drinking it. "What do I do?" I said, and it wasn't really a question. Dennis reached into the drawer again and produced a business card. "Rebecca Marsh. She's a financial attorney. Asset protection, estate law. She's handled 3 cases in the last 2 years that had elements similar to this. I called her yesterday. She can see you today, if you want." "Today," I said. 1 o'clock, if you can make it." I drove home through Tucson traffic with the radio off. The sun was high and the city shimmered in May heat, and I drove through it without really seeing any of it. My mind kept returning to the same point, the way a tongue finds a broken tooth, circling the shape of it, trying to understand the edges. My son was 34 years old. He had his mother's eyes and his mother's capacity for trust. He had watched me build a business from nothing and had learned from it that work was honorable and people were worth believing in. I had raised him that way deliberately, and I had been proud of the result. I thought about all the times in the past 11 months that Diana had been present when I opened the filing cabinet, the times she had carried paperwork to me at my desk, the times she had stood in my office doorway asking questions about the business. Curious questions, she said, because she admired what I had built. She had asked once what my signature looked like on official documents. She had said it with a smile. She had said she was trying to understand the notarization process for something unrelated. I had shown her. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the truck for a moment before going in. Through the front window, I could see the television on, Cody's silhouette on the couch, my house, my furniture, my television that I paid for, with money I had earned across 35 years of building something from nothing. I went inside through the garage. Patrice was in the kitchen making lunch. She nodded at me without stopping what she was doing. The way you nod at someone who lives in the same building but not someone whose house you are occupying without permission or payment. "Diana around?" I asked, casual as I could. She went to get groceries. "Should be back around noon." I went to my office, closed the door, sat down at my desk. I opened the filing cabinet. The index card was there, same as always, my passwords written in my handwriting in blue ink. I picked it up and looked at it for a long moment. Then I put it in my shirt pocket, closed the drawer, and sat down at my computer. Within the hour, I had changed every password, every account, business and personal. I called my bank directly and spoke to the branch manager, a woman named Carol who had handled my accounts for 9 years, and I explained that I believed there had been unauthorized access to my accounts, and I needed to freeze all external transfer capabilities pending a full review. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you called, Mr. Briggs. Let's take care of this right now." That evening, I heard it. I had come back from Rebecca Marsh's office at 4:30 with a folder of my own and a clearer understanding of what was possible. I had gone straight to my bedroom to change out of my dress shirt, and the window that faced the back patio was open an inch because May and Tucson meant nights that were still bearable if you caught them early. Diana was on the patio below, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried. "He doesn't suspect anything," she laughed softly. "Cody found the index card the first week. I know, but listen, we've got the 3 transfers in. Once we get his signature on the property addition, that's the real play. Kyle thinks it's just to protect the house if something happens to Dad." She was quiet for a moment, listening. 2 more months, maybe 3. Once we're on the deed, we file. Split everything the right way. Kyle gets a little, I get a lot, and Mom and Cody are set for at least a year. Another pause. "No," she said. "Kyle doesn't know the full picture. He thinks he's protecting his father's estate. He doesn't know what the transfers were for." She laughed again. "He's sweet. He just wants everyone to be happy." I stood by the window without moving. The fan was on in my room. It was the only sound I was aware of, besides her voice. "The old man spent 40 years building something and he's going to give it away to people who can't even be bothered to say thank you." She paused again. I know. 3 more months at most." I stepped back from the window. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that specifically. I'd expected them to shake, but they were perfectly steady. And I stood in the middle of my bedroom in a town I had lived in for 37 years, in a house I had built with Margaret in 1998, and I understood with complete clarity that I had almost lost everything. Almost. I called Rebecca Marsh before dinner. "Tell me," I said, "everything we can do, and how fast we can do it." Her voice was even and professional. "Everything, Mr. Briggs," she said, "is already in motion. We just need to decide how far." "As far as it goes," I said. I had an appointment at 8 the next morning. Rebecca's office was on the 7th floor of a building downtown. Glass and clean lines. The kind of space that communicates that whoever sits behind those desks has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. She was in her mid-40s, dark hair, direct eyes. She had looked at my documents the previous afternoon without a single change in expression. Now she had additions. She spread papers across the conference table. "The Suncrest transfers are recoverable," she said. "We file a complaint today with the Arizona AG's Financial Crimes Unit. The forgery is documented, the shell company is traceable, and the transfers are recent enough that the funds are likely still accessible. This is a winnable case." She moved to the next page. "The online banking transfer of $12,000 is trickier because your son had authorized access. It depends on whether he directed the transfer knowingly. Do you believe he did?" I thought about my son. I thought about his mother's eyes. I thought about Diana telling someone on the phone that Kyle didn't know the full picture. "I think he was used," I said. "Not innocent, but used." Rebecca nodded. "That's a distinction that will matter later. For now, we protect your assets." She slid a document toward me. "Irrevocable trust. Everything transfers. Business interests, property, savings, investment accounts, all into trust management. You maintain complete control during your lifetime. After your death, distribution goes exactly where you direct, not where anyone assumes." "How long?" 2 weeks for complete filing. "But we start immediately. Your bank accounts are already frozen to external transfers? Changed everything last night." She almost smiled. "Good." She pulled out another sheet. "The property deed. You mentioned Diana asked Kyle to raise the topic of adding her name. Kyle brought it up last month. He said it was estate planning. I told him I'd think about it." She looked at me. "Never sign that document, Mr. Briggs." I had no intention of signing that document. We worked for 2 hours. I signed the trust engagement. I signed the attorney representation agreement. I provided bank records, the vendor payment documents, the Secretary of State registration for Suncrest. Rebecca had a paralegal photograph, everything, and returned my originals. When I stood to leave, she said, "Mr. Briggs, your son, have you decided what to tell him?" I had been sitting with that question since the night before. "Not yet," I said. "Not until I know how much he knows." She nodded. "Be careful. If he alerts his wife to any of this before we've secured the filings, they could move money or cloud the record." "I understand." I drove home in the early afternoon. Cody's car was gone, which happened sometimes, and meant nothing about whether he would be back that night. Patrice's car was in the driveway. Diana's was there too. I went inside through the front door this time, the way I used to before their presence had taught me to use the garage to avoid conversation. Diana was on the couch with a glass of iced tea. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, Dad. Long morning?" "Business things," I said. "Is Kyle home?" "Not until 6. She crossed her legs, relaxed. "Patrice and I were thinking of trying that new Italian place tonight. You should come." I looked at her. The smile, the iced tea in her hand, the ease with which she occupied my living room, my furniture, the space Margaret and I had built together over 26 years of marriage. "Maybe," I said. I went to my office and closed the door. I sat down and looked at the family photograph on my desk. Kyle at 16, that summer, we drove to Yellowstone. Margaret squinting into the sun, my arm around both of them, the three of us looking like the simplest possible version of a family, which was what we had been. I missed her with a specific sharpness in that moment that I had learned to expect at odd times. She would have seen this coming. Not because Margaret was suspicious by nature, but because she paid attention to small things. She would have noticed the slight pause when Diana answered certain questions. She would have mentioned it to me quietly one evening, and I would have said, "I thought I was overthinking it." And she would have said, "Walter, when have I ever been wrong about a person?" I opened my laptop and typed out 3 pages of notes. Every conversation I could remember where Diana had been present for discussions about money. Every time I had seen her near the filing cabinet. Every time Cody had asked questions about the business, about real estate, about what I planned to do with the properties when I retired. I included dates where I had them. I sent the document to Rebecca's email and labeled it Supplemental Notes. The week that followed was the kind of week where every normal thing felt slightly wrong, the way a familiar room looks different when you know someone has been inside it without your permission. I went to the hardware store in the mornings, which I did twice a week out of habit, even though I'd sold the business in its full form years ago and kept only one location as a hobby. I handled paperwork in the afternoons. I ate dinner with whoever was in the kitchen and said the things people say at dinner. On Wednesday morning, Cody cornered me in the garage. He leaned against my truck with his arms crossed, his voice low and conspiratorial, like a man who believed he was being generous by letting me in on something. "Hey, Walter, I've been thinking about something. Got a business idea. Nothing huge, but real potential." He looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed this. "I just need a little seed capital to get it started. 20, maybe 25,000. You'd see it back double in 18 months. Guaranteed." I looked at him. I opened my truck door. "No, Cody," I said. The word landed flat between us. He straightened. "What do you mean no? I haven't even explained the whole thing. I got in my truck." He grabbed the door before I could close it. Not aggressive, but not far from it. "Come on, man. I'm family here. You've helped Kyle and Diana. You can help me too." I looked at him, standing in my garage. 40-something, broad across the shoulders, a man who had never once in the months he'd spent in my house offered to pay for a meal or fix something or do anything that a person does when they are grateful for shelter. A man who had copied my passwords off an index card in my filing cabinet and handed them to his girlfriend's daughter. "You're not family, Cody," I said. "Close the door." He stood for a moment, something working behind his eyes. Then he stepped back. I pulled the door shut and backed out. In the rearview mirror, I watched him standing in my garage with his arms crossed, watching me go. That evening, my son came home at 6:30. Diana had made dinner. Patrice had set the table. Cody appeared from somewhere and sat down like he belonged there. The 5 of us ate, and I watched my son the way I used to watch him at his school plays, looking for the particular expression that meant he was performing versus the expression that meant he was present. He was somewhere in between. He laughed at the right moments. He put his hand on Diana's hand at the right moments. But twice, I caught him looking at me with something in his face that I couldn't name immediately, and then recognized as guilt. Not the guilt of someone who has done something terrible. The guilt of someone who is not sure whether what they've done qualifies as terrible and is hoping they'll never have to find out. After dinner, I helped clear the table. My son carried dishes to the sink and we stood side by side the way we used to, and I could feel him working up to something. "Dad," he said quietly while the water ran, "Diana mentioned you seem a little distant lately. Is everything okay?" I looked at my hands in the soapy water. "Business things," I said. "Nothing to worry about." He was quiet for a moment. Then she was asking again about the deed, about adding her to the property. "She says it would protect both of us if something happened." I turned off the water, dried my hands. I looked at my son. "I'm not doing that, Kyle," I said. "Not right now." His jaw tightened slightly. "Dad, it's not a big deal. It's just protection." "Not right now," I said again. I left him at the sink. The documents arrived from Rebecca on a Tuesday morning. I had asked her for 2 things. The eviction notices for Patrice and Cody, who had no lease, no rental agreement, no legal basis for occupancy, and the complete trust filing confirmation. Both arrived in the same envelope. I read the trust summary twice. Everything I had spent 35 years building was now inside a legal structure that my daughters-in-law and her mother's boyfriend could not touch. My son was listed for a portion because I loved him and believed that the part of him that had been deceived was larger than the part that had participated. The remainder went to 3 charities Margaret had supported, and to the Children's Hospital where Margaret had spent her last 11 days. I held the eviction notices for most of the day. I had spent 11 months finding reasons to wait, finding reasons to believe the situation would resolve itself, finding patience I associated with maturity but which had, in fact, been closer to avoidance. I walked into the living room at 7 that evening. Patrice was watching television. Cody was eating chips from a bag that belonged to me. Diana was on her phone. I placed 2 envelopes on the coffee table. "What's this?" Patrice picked hers up. "Written notice of required vacancy. You have 30 days to find alternative housing." The room changed immediately. Patrice's face went through several expressions before settling on outrage. Cody stood up. Diana looked up from her phone with very still eyes. "You're joking," Patrice said. "No lease, no rental agreement, No financial contribution to this household, I said. Legally, you are guests who have overstayed. The notice is formal and legally valid. Cody stepped toward me. This is ridiculous. You can't just throw people out because you feel like it. We've been helping around here. I looked at him. The last thing he had helped with was carrying a box of wine from Patrice's car into my kitchen. 30 days, I said. Diana had not moved. She was watching me with those still eyes, recalculating. I could see it happening. She had the kind of intelligence that functioned best when it had time to work, and I had just removed the time. "Where's Kyle?" she said. "Does Kyle know about this?" "I'll talk to my son," I said. "This is my house, and this is my decision." She stood up slowly. "Dad." Her voice shifted to the warmer register, the one she used when she wanted something. "This is a misunderstanding. We're family. Whatever's bothering you, we can talk about it. We can talk about Suncrest Materials," I said. The warmth left her face like a light switching off. Cody started to say something. Patrice was already talking, louder now, her voice filling the room with noise that was designed to confuse and overwhelm and override. I had seen that tactic used in negotiations before. You generate enough noise that the other person forgets what they said and why. I walked to my office. Closed the door. Behind me, the noise continued. Cody's voice dropping into something harder. Patrice's rising. Diana's going quiet, which was more alarming than either of the other two. "I called my son," he answered on the second ring. "Dad? Everything okay? I need you to come home tonight. There are some things you need to know, and I'd rather tell you myself before someone else does." There was a pause. I could hear road noise. He was already in his car. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He arrived to chaos. Patrice and Cody in the living room, Patrice crying, Cody on his phone calling someone and describing me as having lost his mind. Diana standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, watching my son walk in. I watched my son's face move through confusion into something more difficult. "Kyle," Diana said, "your father served my mother an eviction notice." My son looked at me. "Come to my office," I said. I closed the door and sat behind my desk. My son sat in the chair across from me the same way he had sat in it at 17 when I had to tell him his grandfather wasn't going to make it. Same posture, same braced expression. I put the Suncrest documents on the desk. The forgery analysis, the wire transfer records, the Secretary of State registration with Diana's name on it. I didn't say anything. I let him read. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. His color changed. When he looked up, his eyes were not the eyes of someone who had known. They were the eyes of someone who had not known, but who was beginning to understand things that had puzzled him, and the understanding was worse than the ignorance had been. "Dad," he said. His voice was low. "I know. The $12,000 transfer." He looked at the paper again. "From your savings." I gave her the login because she said she needed to pay a contractor for a surprise she was doing for you. She said she'd put it back in 2 days. I looked at my son. "Did she put it back?" He closed his eyes. "No. She said the contractor hadn't invoiced yet." I forgot about it. I should not have forgotten about it. His voice was careful and controlled in the way that people's voices get when they are holding something together by sheer effort. "The Suncrest account," I said. "The forged signatures. Those were not you." "No." He shook his head once, hard. "No. I believe you," I said. He looked at the papers again. His hands were on his knees, and he was very still. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you known?" 10 days. He looked up. "You didn't say anything." "I needed to secure things first," I said. "I needed to make sure that by the time I said anything, there was nothing left to take." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the door, Patrice's voice had dropped. I could hear Diana's voice now, low and steady, and I imagined her reframing the situation the way she always reframed things, finding the angle, constructing the version that would play best. "What happens now?" my son asked. "The financial crimes complaint has already been filed with the Attorney General's office," I said. "Rebecca Marsh is handling it. The trust is complete. Everything I have is protected. Your mother's house is protected." At the mention of his mother, his face changed again, briefly, and then steadied. "And Diana," he said. "That's your decision," I said. I won't make it for you, but I'll tell you what I heard her say. I told him everything. The phone conversation from the patio. 2 more months. Kyle doesn't know the full picture. The old man, the deed, the split. My son sat with it. He was 34 years old, and he had married someone 7 months after meeting her because she had made him believe that certainty was possible and trust was something you gave without auditing. His mother had died before she could sit across from Diana at dinner and notice the small wrongnesses. He had not had that protection. I didn't make her do any of this, he said finally. I need you to know that. I know that, I said. But I handed her the password, he said. I vouched for her. I told you she was asking about the deed because she cared about protecting the family. You were deceived, I said. That's different from complicity. He stood up. He was taller than me by 2 inches, same build as my father. He stood in my office looking at the documents on my desk with an expression I had not seen on his face since the week after Margaret died. Then he walked out and closed the door. I heard his voice in the living room. Quiet at first, then not quiet. Diana's voice, then Patrice's, then Cody saying something that made my son's voice go cold in a way that I had not heard before. I did not go out. That conversation was his to have. An hour passed. The front door opened and closed twice. Cody's car started. Patrice's followed. I heard Diana's voice in the bedroom, high and urgent, and my son's voice, low and final. At 9:30, my son knocked on my office door. Come in. He sat back down. His face was tired in the way that faces get after something has been decided. She's saying it was a misunderstanding, he said, that the transfers were loans she planned to repay, that the Suncrest account was for a business idea she hadn't told me about yet. Of course she is. He looked at his hands. I told her I needed some time. She left to stay with a friend. He looked up. I'm going to need a lawyer too. I nodded. Rebecca can refer someone. He was quiet. I'm sorry, Dad. He said it without looking at me. You built everything, you and Mom. And I brought someone into this house who... He didn't finish. You didn't know, I said. I should have paid more attention. To what you said. To the things I noticed but explained away because I didn't want them to be what they looked like. I thought about Margaret. About the number of times she had noticed something I had missed, and waited patiently for me to catch up. About the specific quality of her patience, which had never been condescension, and had always been love. Your mother used to say, I told him, that the hardest thing about trusting people is that you can't take it back selectively. You give it, and then you hope. Sometimes the hope turns out to be right, and sometimes it turns out to be expensive. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, What do I do now? You stay here tonight, I said. We have breakfast tomorrow, and then we figure out next week. He nodded once. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table until past midnight, not talking about Diana or Patrice or the legal process, talking instead about the hardware store, about a fishing trip we had been meaning to take for 3 years, about the summer before his mother got sick, when the 3 of us had driven up to Flagstaff and stayed in a cabin and played cards every night until 2 in the morning. He slept in his old room. I slept better than I had in 11 months. The days that followed were not quiet, but they were purposeful, which is a different thing. Rebecca moved forward with the AG complaint. The forensic accounting firm she had recommended confirmed the forgery analysis, producing a 17-page report that removed any ambiguity about what had happened. The $12,000 transfer was flagged for civil recovery. The Suncrest transfers were flagged for criminal fraud referral. Patrice and Cody did not leave at the 30-day mark. I had anticipated that. On the 31st morning, Deputy Garza arrived at 8 o'clock with the enforcement order. I met her at the door. Professional, experienced, exactly what the situation required. Patrice cried. She made speeches about family and hospitality and what kind of person throws a grandmother out of her daughter's home. Deputy Garza listened to approximately 90 seconds of this and then explained, with the particular patience of someone who has done this many times, that she had 2 hours to collect personal belongings and that the legal status of the property was not in question. Cody made a different kind of speech, shorter, more threatening. Deputy Garza turned to him and said, Sir, I suggest you focus on packing. He packed. They left in a car that Cody drove too fast down my street. I watched from the doorway. My son called that afternoon from his lawyer's office. The divorce petition had been filed. Diana had retained an attorney. The process would take time, but it had started. "How are you?" I asked. He was quiet for a second. "Relieved," he said. "Which feels like the wrong thing to feel. But relieved, that's not the wrong thing," I said. I sat on the back patio that evening with a glass of iced tea and watched the Catalinas go through their colors. Pink, then purple, then the deep blue-gray that meant the day was finished. A roadrunner crossed the far edge of my yard the way they had for as long as I had lived here. Margaret had loved roadrunners. She said they looked like they were always late for something important. My phone showed 2 missed calls from Patrice's number, which I had just blocked. One text from a number I didn't recognize that said simply, "You'll regret this," which I assumed was Cody, and which I deleted without responding. Rebecca called at 7. "The AG's office has opened a formal investigation into the Suncrest transfers," she said. "Based on the forensic report and the shell company registration, they're treating this as premeditated financial fraud. There may be additional complainants." "Additional complainants?" She paused. "We ran Diana's name through civil court records as a precaution. There's a dismissed civil suit in Maricopa County from 2 years ago. An elderly man, 71, alleged financial exploitation by his son's wife. The case was dismissed when the man declined to pursue it. Same basic pattern." I sat with that. "She'd done this before," I said. "It appears so," Rebecca said. "The AG's office will determine the scope. You are not the first." I thought about that 71-year-old man in Maricopa County. I thought about whatever his version of the index card had been, whatever his version of the filing cabinet. "Make sure they know everything we have," I said. "Already sent." 3 weeks later, the trust finalization arrived by courier. I signed the last documents at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the roadrunner somewhere in the yard and the Catalinas bright in the morning light. Margaret's name was not on any of the documents, but her presence was in all of them. The house she had designed, the equity built from business we had run together, the hospital that had kept her comfortable at the end. I drove to the hardware store and spent the morning doing what I did there, which was mostly talking to contractors who came in and hearing about their projects, and occasionally teaching a young employee something about the mechanics of what we sold. It was not work that required me. It was work I had chosen to keep because it connected me to something I understood. My son called at noon. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Working on it," he said. "His lawyer says the process will take 6 to 8 months. She's contesting asset division." He paused. "Dad, I know this isn't the right time, but..." He stopped. "Say it," I said. "I should have listened to you. In the beginning, I could see you were uncomfortable, and I told myself you were just adjusting. I chose her side of it before I had any information. You were in love," I said. "That's not an excuse." "No," I said, "but it's a reason. There's a difference." He was quiet. "Can I come for dinner tonight?" he asked. I was already pulling out the skillet. "Be here at 6, I said. That evening, my son and I ate dinner at the same table where I had watched Diana and Patrice operate for 11 months. We talked about the fishing trip again, and this time we actually looked at dates. We talked about what he was going to do next, professionally, personally, with the 6 to 8 months ahead. We talked about his mother the way we did sometimes, the specific way that people talk about someone who isn't there anymore but is still involved in the conversation. At one point, he looked around the kitchen. "It looks the same," he said. "It's the same house," I said. "No." He looked at me. "It looks the way it used to look, before." I understood what he meant. The particular quality of a space when it belongs to the people who built it. A week later, I received a call from a woman named Susan Cho. She was a reporter with the Tucson Citizen covering financial exploitation cases against elderly residents. And Rebecca had given her my name with my permission. The AG case was moving, and Susan was writing about the pattern. We spoke for 40 minutes. I told her the factual version, the accountant's call, the shell company, the forged signatures, the index card, the eviction. She asked if I wanted to share anything beyond the facts. I thought about it. "I'd say," I told her, that people who are building something their whole lives sometimes forget to protect it. They're too busy building. By the time someone comes at you from the inside, from people you love, or people who have borrowed the appearance of love, you're not positioned to see it. Not right away. I was lucky that someone else saw it first and told me. She asked who that was. My accountant, I said. 22 years. He called me on a Thursday morning and said, "Come in alone." That call was worth more than any lock I could have put on anything. She asked if I had any regrets. One, I said. I waited too long. The discomfort was there for months, and I told myself it was just adjustment. It wasn't. When something feels wrong in a consistent direction, it probably is. She thanked me. The article ran the following Tuesday. My son called after he read it. "That last part," he said, "about waiting too long. Were you talking about me too?" I was quiet for a moment. "A little," I said. "I know," he said. "I know." We went fishing that Saturday. A reservoir up near Mount Lemon, one Margaret had liked because the drive was beautiful. We got there early, before anyone else. And we sat on the bank with our lines in the water and the sun still low. Birds I didn't know the names of moved through the brush. The water was very still. My son caught a bass at 7:30 and released it back, because neither of us had brought a cooler. We laughed about that. We had planned this trip for 3 years, and neither of us had thought to bring a cooler. Margaret would have brought the cooler, he said. She would have brought the cooler and sandwiches and those chips she liked and something cold to drink, I said. And she would have caught the biggest fish. Without question, I said. We sat with that for a while. Easy silence. The particular kind that you can only have with someone you don't need to perform for. My house was mine again. My accounts were secured. The trust was finalized. The investigation was moving. My son was sitting next to me at a reservoir on a Saturday morning doing nothing more complicated than waiting for fish. I thought about what it had cost to get here. Not the money, though there was that. The time. The months of manufactured patience that had not been patience at all. The index card that I had trusted to a drawer instead of a memory. The one conversation I had not had early enough because I had not wanted it to be necessary. I thought about Dennis Hartwell sitting in his office on a Wednesday afternoon going through my quarterly reports and stopping at a line in a spreadsheet and picking up the phone. I owed that man more than I could calculate. Next week, I was having lunch with Dennis. His wife was going to be there. I had never properly met his wife in 22 years, and that seemed like something worth correcting. The water moved. A bird crossed the far bank. "Dad," my son said. "Thank you." "For what?" I said. "For not giving up on me while you were dealing with all of it." I looked at him. The same eyes his mother had given him. The same steadiness she had put there by example. "You're my son," I said. "That's not a calculation." He nodded and turned back to the water. The morning stretched out around us, wide and uncomplicated. A life that was mine again, spent the way I was choosing to spend it. At a reservoir I had always meant to visit more, with the one person I was glad to have next to me. The next chapter was already writing itself, and for the first time in longer than I cared to count, I was the one holding the pen. If this story moved you or reminded you of something in your own life, please leave a comment below. Subscribe to Shadow Vengeance for new stories every week. To hear the next story, click the box on the left.